Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture Podcast with me, Pete Tigers. Today, I'm speaking with someone who is a writer and a journalist, has fished in the salt and fresh water, and has caught numerous species on the fly. His well-observed and witty social media post got me commenting and striking up a conversation with him, and I feel you're going to enjoy his view on life and fishing. And so I asked him along to talk with me today. I'd like to welcome Paul Cañada along to the podcast. Paul, it's great to have you along. How are you doing?
Hi, Pete. Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I'm a fan of your show.
Oh, don't stop that now. Yeah, you'll have to stop that now. Listen, remember, this show's all about you, so we'll move on very, very quickly. And for our listeners, can you tell us where you're based, please?
I live in Gunnison, Colorado. We say it's the refrigerator of the Rocky Mountains. Winter temperatures here can get about 35 below, but it's a beautiful river valley. The Taylor River comes down from the Crested Butte area along with the East River, and they meet the Gunnison River, and then the Gunnison River turns west. It's only 7,000 people here in town, so it's kind of a small town. I love this place.
And the Gunnison, would I be right thinking the Gunnison is one of those rivers that it's in a gorge and getting in and out of it's quite complicated?
Portions of it. It's a really interesting river. It kind of collects above Gunnison in a town called, let's see, I hope I pronounced this right, because I'm brand new. I've only been living here like 3.5 months. I think it's called Altmont, but the Three River area, the confluence is right there. Then it flows down around the western side of town. I mean, I'm like 2 minutes from the river. It's awesome. It's awesome. And then I got a creek with trout that I'm only like 4 minutes away from. And I mean, I've got rivers and streams everywhere around me, but it goes through town. And then after it goes through town, it swings westward. And unfortunately, in my opinion, they dammed up the river. I forget what year, but they did it for water supply. Because of the Colorado River, we've had a lot of problems with keeping Powell and Meade full of water, and so in their wisdom, they decided to dam up the Gunnison River. And unfortunately, that portion that got dammed up was where all the fish camps and all the hotels and the little towns that cater to fly fishermen. And fly fishermen came from all over the world to fish the Gunnison back then because of the stonefly hatch. Was just tremendous, and it still has plenty of insects. But so that becomes Blue Mesa Reservoir, and then Blue Mesa Reservoir, the river continues into the Black Canyon, which is one of the natural wonders of the world. It's incredible. About a 2,000, 3,000 foot straight drop, and so yes, you have to. They do rafting guide trips out of there. So. Above the reservoir, you can fish it just like a normal river. It fishes like a big river. There's holes that the trout hold into and stuff like that. But it's really got a lot of brown and rainbow trout.
That sounds like heaven already. And although you said that you've only been living there 3.5 months, you are well acquainted with the rivers and streams of Colorado anyway. Yes. And have fished them. Do you have a favorite stream in the area or in Colorado?
I've got 2 places that are like heaven for me. And when I say I've only been here 3.5 months, my wife is I think, deputy finance director for the county. And that's her job. So we came here for her job. But anyway, the two rivers, the 2 rivers that that I really like. Well, I'd say the St. Vrain is my absolute favorite. Maybe because of trout bum. When I read Trout Bum long ago, and Garrock talking about the river, and Ed Ingalls from that area. He's from Boulder area. I think he's still from there. And I lived just outside. I lived in Boulder County, just outside of Lyons, Colorado, where John Garrock kind of got his start on the St. Vrain, and so I would fish it like 2 to 3 times a week. And so for me, and it's a gin colored, the South Fork, the fork that I fish. It's a gin colored river with and it's pretty steep grade down, and it can be tough to fish, and it has a natural barrier, which is like a 20-foot drop falls, and below there you can find rainbows, but above the falls it's all wild or feral brown trout, and they reproduce in the river, the browns. I love brown trout. That's my Achilles heel. And then the second place I was going to mention is Grand Mesa, which is, people here say it's the largest flat top mountain in the world. And there's over 200 lakes, and every one of those lakes has an outlet and an inlet. And there's all kinds of fish there, tiger trout, cutthroats, cutbows. Some of the lakes have Mackinaw or lake trout in them. Some have, it's just got everything. But you can't, you can get up there and get away from people because there's so much fishing up there that you don't have to deal with people at all. And you see a lot of wildlife up there too. So that's another favorite of mine.
They sound perfect. I've been lucky enough to fish the St. Vrain around Lyons, so I know exactly what you're talking about and what a beautiful spot that it is. And the coffee shop in town, I sat in there and had my breakfast and got up jet lagged and fished early in the morning and really enjoyed that. So that's a beautiful place. And like you say, the choice of fishing is just wonderful. And when I was last there, and it's been a little while, things were starting to change a little bit in that there was a little bit more private land than there had been. Things were changing a little bit. Has that trend continued, or have people fought back with that a little bit?
I think I don't want to speak out of line here because I myself have been away from there for about 4 years. But when Lyons got hit by a pretty devastating flood, and it wiped out the river bottom through Lyons, and a lot of the art community that was there, because it was kind of like an artist town, got wiped out. And thanks to Trout Unlimited and some federal money, they were able to rebuild that bottom line. They improved the habitat for the river down there, and they improved the habitat just on the South Fork, just north of town. Or I say north, but actually I think it's west of town. And but what happened to the town was a lot of these homes, like, trailer homes and older homes like we have here in Gunnison, got swept away. And the town's population kind of changed a bit, and the cost of owning a property in Lyons got more expensive. So what happened is you had the Boulder, not the original Boulder crowd like John Garrock, but the wealthy people that moved into Boulder, and some would say ruined it. Now they moved into Lyons, and so the town is its image has changed a bit. And those people buy property. It's a beautiful town to go to. But some things did happen. I don't know, what year did you go? Do you remember?
I'm trying to think. It must have been about 15 years ago now, actually. It's a little while, 15, 18 years. So it's just ahead of the flood, actually, I think.
Yes, you were just ahead of the flood. And there's been a lot of habitat improvement by Trout Unlimited and also some FEMA, federal emergency money. And so that helped a lot. And they actually improved the habitat of the river. The other good thing is I was fishing the South Fork, and that has a highway that runs along it. So there's not a lot of land people can buy up there. There are a few private driveways, but you're not going to get into their land, and they do post it pretty well. If it's private property and they don't want you on there, they post it. But on the South Fork, you can drive quite a distance and be able to fish all of it. It's just a different type of stream that most people aren't used to. I mean, I'd go out there and fish it, and then fly fishing tourists would come by, and they'd park, and they would come over to talk to me, and they go, there's no fish in there. There's no fish in there. And I just, I just love that because, thank you for telling me. I don't know what I caught just back there. But I mean, but the thing is the brown trout in that stream are so well camouflaged. They have golden brown backs. And the color of the bottom, it's a freestone river, and the rocks are, that same color. And you can't really see the fish unless you really are trained as an angler, a fly angler, to see them. I mean, So anyway, that's good. And then the other thing about the St. Vrain is the city of Longmont purchased some land up there, and I think it's called, I can't remember what it's called. We have a preserve up there. Oh, Button Rock Preserve. And it covers it's the North Fork of the river, and it's got lots of great habitat all the way up to the reservoir, the water reservoir that Longmont uses to provide water for its community. And it's awesome, and it gets a lot of use by hikers and stuff, and not as many fishermen though sometimes, which really surprised me. Great brown trout up there. So that, and that I hope I helped a little bit with that explanation.
Absolutely. That gives us a sense of, because obviously we're a tiny country that is densely populated. And I think one of the reasons that fishing in the US and Scandinavia, I'm using that as an example, is because of the large amount of public land that encourages and allows people to be able to get out on the water a lot more easily and a lot more cheaply as well. And I'm convinced that has something to do with it. So I'm kind of interested to see that. And as somebody who's watched the Yellowstone series and how Bozeman's been brought up post-COVID as well, I'm kind of interested to see how these things play out. But you've got outfits like Trout Unlimited that must have such a big impact and looking out for the fish, which is most important of all, but I guess also for that resource as a whole, that it can't be tied up so tightly as well, that people are allowed to use that resource. So it seems really interesting as an outsider to look in. And I detected some small changes last time I was there. As I said, it's been a little while since I've certainly been to Colorado, but I detected that there was talk of that. That's what I was sort of picking up. But you talked about the brown trout, and I'm really interested to see, how do you like to fish for them? What's your preferred method for fishing?
Dry. Dry. When I first moved back to Colorado, well, the first time I came to Colorado, I would say, because I lived here when I was a child, and we were forced to move. My grandma got really sick, and my father was one of the younger brothers, so they convinced him he had to move back to California. But my second time here, where I finally moved back to Colorado, which is tied to the book, The Promise. I tried nymphing because it was the season. The fish were cold. The water was, the ice was just off, and the fish were low. And everybody told me, you're not going to catch them if you don't go nymphing, if you don't nymph them. So I used to use the little styrofoam indicator, and I would fish that way, and I would catch some fish, but I don't know. You probably don't know this, but I used to write for Bassmasters magazine, and I did a lot of. I was really into the bass scene. I tournament fished myself, and so that's all active lures and casting a lure, and so you're not. To me, nymphing was kind of like putting a worm on the end of my bobber and putting it out there and just waiting for a fish to grab it. Obviously, it's a lot deeper than that, especially Euro nymphing, which I do on occasion for bigger fish. But I don't know. I just never really got into nymphing, and my friends are all right. All my friends tell me, all my guide friends tell me, well, you're missing out on a lot of big fish if you don't nymph. And they're absolutely right. But like right now, I've been here. I came in early February, and the Gunnison's been on and off good fishing, but it's all been nymphing. And I went out one day on the East River and tried to nymph, and the water was low. It was very, very cold. And you have to go look for deep holes where the trout are holding. And then you have to get that nymph right down in front of them. And I tried it, And I wore myself out so bad doing it that I said, you know what? I told my wife, I said, you know what? I'm not going to go fishing until the dry fly season starts up, because that's what I love to do, is fish dries. And thank God the dry fly season on the Taylor is starting to pick up a little bit with midges. And so I'm excited. I'm going to go fish the Taylor this week. So, but I like dry fly fishing with light rods, light action rods, say a 3-weight or a 4-weight with a large arbor reel, just in case I hook into something that's as big as I am. You know,
we can always hope that is the case. We can always hope. That's what keeps us coming back, I'm sure. But
yeah,
how would you describe yourself as an angler? Well, and I don't mean about prowess, but are you somebody who wants to fish hard and long? Are you somebody who wants to fish alone? Are you somebody who, living so close to the water, I guess, does that mean that you will grab an hour or 2 hours, or do you want to fish from dusk till dawn? How would you describe yourself so listeners can get a sense?
Well, typically what I do since I've retired, I retired back in, I think 2018. My wife kind of told me, you know, you need to retire and enjoy life. You're going to die. You're going to die. If you die at your dad's age, you only have a few years left to live. So she convinced me to retire. She makes decent enough money where we can do it. And thank God. And so what I would do is I'd pick 3 days. I'd go like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because on the Front Range, it's crowded. I mean, you got Boulder, you got Longmont, you got Fort Collins, you got Loveland and Denver and Aurora. There's a lot of fly fishermen in that area. And so I started going on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because that cut down the amount of people. And then, in fact, you might not believe this, but I haven't fished a hatch in like 5 or 6 years. And the reason is because I go out at 9 a.m. I get up in the morning, I have my coffee, I see my wife off to work. I take my time to go upriver, and I start around 9 a.m. It's colder than heck because, you're typically in a canyon, you're in shade. And, but the midges typically would hatch, not a large midge hatch, just you start seeing a few midges flying around your face. And what I learned was, I used to fish in the afternoon closer to the hatch times. But what I learned was that brown trout will feed early in the morning, and you can get them on dries. And what a friend told me, I told a friend, I said, hey, I need something like a midge. They're black, but they're so tiny, I can't see, they're a fly, but I really can't figure out what fly to use for them. And my friend's a great fly tyer. He lives down in Alamosa, Colorado. And he said, I can get you a black ant around size 22. And I go, wait, I don't even tie anymore because I can't see. I mean, I'm farsighted and nearsighted. I can't, I have bifocals when I go fly fishing. I go, so I really can't tie myself. And he goes, don't worry, I'll put a flag on there for you. So he ties them with a big O parachute. And I started fishing those in the morning, and the brown trout, love them. I mean, you get some pretty, on that river on St. Vrain, if you catch a 15-inch brown, you caught a big fish, and you should be proud. I did see about a 21-inch brown that was taken by the Parks and Wildlife people as they were, surveying. And that was the biggest thing I've ever seen on that, on the Middle Fork. The North Fork. So I would just go in the morning, and I would put on a terrestrial, and I would dry fly it. And the thing is you're not watching for rising fish, because sometimes once the side of the canyon started warming up, you would start seeing some hatches pop, and you'd see some fish rise. But early in the morning, you're fishing in shadows, and I would just, the brown really hold tight to structure. The sizable browns do. So they like boulders and stuff like that. And I would just target them as if I was fishing for for bass. I would just get my fly in there as close as I can to the boulders, and voila, I'd catch a brown trout. So that's typically how I would start off. So yes, I would fish, I would pick my days. I would fish 2 or 3 times a day. And that's how I got to know the St. Vrain so well. And I fish pretty much alone, and there's a reason. And I got a funny story about why. I don't know if you want to hear it, but
Oh yeah.
yeah. Well, when I was writing for Bassmasters, I met some of the best fishermen in the country, and I met a young man from Missouri. He was a tournament fisherman, but he guided on some of the rivers in Arkansas, and there's a lot of great smallmouth bass rivers and trout rivers. But he wanted to take me down on the Kings River. And I said, great. And while we were talking, we were going to float the Kings River actually in fall. The water level was low, but he thought that would isolate the bigger smallmouth. One thing when we were talking, he said, I really need a crankbait or plastic. I need a lure sponsor. Well, it just so happened that one of my good friends was a PR man for the largest lure company. I'm not going to say the company or his name because it was not a good story for him. Said, I said, hey, I'll get you in touch with him. Would you mind if we bring him along? We bring him along. He lives right there in Arkansas. And he said, sure, bring him. And we brought him. And we were literally trying to hunt for these fish because they were in deep holes and they were holding real tight to boulders. And we had only caught a few. And it was hard. It was hard fishing. The guy we brought had a tiny little crankbait that looked like a crayfish, a tiny little crankbait. And he kept dragging it behind the boat. It kept snagging the rocks, and we'd have to stop, and he'd have to get out of the boat and go get his crankbait back. And then he was like catching and snagging little tiny smallmouth that were around 4 or 5 inches. And we had only caught a few. And every time he caught one of those little things and let it go, he'd go, that's 62 for me and only 3 for you. That's 65 for me and only 3 for you. And the guide was ready to kill him. And after that, I told myself, I'm never going to fish with anybody ever again unless I know them. So I've gone out with an editor friend of mine, Cal Tatum, and I taught my son how to fly fish in August on Grand Mesa, and he's a killer fly fisherman. He's only been fly fishing for a few months. He caught himself a 23-inch bass the other day on a fly rod. He's hooked. He just loves fly fishing. But mostly I don't fish with other people because I fish for for the peace of it. I fish for the peace of it and the environment. And then the other thing, to answer your question, you asked another part of the question. I have a rule: 2 fish, I'm home. So unless I'm in Alaska or, unless I'm somewhere afar, locally, I catch 2 fish and I go home. And I do that because I told my friends it was because of karma. I told them, if I keep hammering this river, it's not going to give me anything back later. So out of conservation and just, I just do 2 fish and I go home. And it cuts my day short. Usually it's about a 2-hour day, maybe less than that. And I go, like you were mentioning, I go to the coffee shop in Lyons afterwards, after fishing the St. Vrain, and enjoy a coffee. And I go home and I start writing. That's typically the kind of angler I am. I want some solitude, peace. The other thing you'll find interesting about my character is I don't wear waders. I wade wet. So I wear shorts. I have a pair of hunting boots I have to replace every year because they get damaged. I buy a pair of hunting boots and I put on some neoprene socks and I put them up to my knees and I wade. I just love feeling that cold water, rushing around my legs. And I just feel like I'm a part of the river when I'm wading wet. So I wet wade a lot, pretty much all the time.
That's really nice, and I like the karma thing. I was thinking about what you were saying about it, and whether it might have been a tough morning, and then the fish was starting to come on, and then you catch one, and then you catch another. And I don't know if I'm quite at the stage where if it looked like they were starting to wake up, whether I could walk away. But you have my utmost respect for the karma aspects of it, the wet wading as well. And I detect there's a lot of that starting to happen more so in the US now, I guess not during the winter, but certainly throughout the season. And even over here, it's starting. And I was just reading a thread somewhere or other before we spoke about somebody talking about wet wading as well. So I suspect I think these things do filter down from the US style of fishing to over here too as well. So it's interesting from that point of view. And we've talked about standing in a cold stream, but also that you've done a hell of a lot of fishing in the saltwater as well. And would you say, before we move on to that, do you have a preference from fresh over saltwater? Is there something that you preferred? If I put your arm behind your back and said choose one, would there be one, or you like them both for different reasons?
Well, just saying what I'm about to say will give you an understanding of it. But I used to live in Texas when I wrote for Bassmasters and stuff. Texas has incredible bass fishing. Probably, some people are going to argue with me, but I think it's the best in the country, and if not the world. And so it was smart for me to live in Texas. I had a corporate training manager job for a corporation that was in Irving, Texas. So that's why I was living there. But I chose to leave Texas to move to Colorado, where we don't have any saltwater fishing. So, but of the two, if I can be on a mountain stream, and I'm talking about either a meandering stream in a like in a moraine type valley, or a stream that's got a pretty good grade to it, I prefer fishing in streams. I heard your interview with Ed Engel, and I kind of agree with a lot of the things he's decided on his own. And I don't know if that's age, if maybe, I'm 67 now, I'm approaching 70. I think, I always tell my wife, I'm 67, I get to decide what I want to do. Because a friend on Facebook, and he's a guide, a really great guide, told me, I was saying I don't like nymph fishing. I just don't. I'd rather wait until the dry season. And he goes, and he was joking. He goes, I thought you were a complete angler. And I told him, well, I'm 67. I can decide to do what I want to do now. I don't care what the community thinks about me. But I do love saltwater fishing. I mean, you asked me to read something from one of my books, and I chose a chapter on Ursa. I'm just going to read a small portion about it, about fishing Ursa, and that's a tension leg platform, big giant oil platform in the Gulf of Mexico, and we fish for yellowfin tuna, yellowfin and black, and with a big old 12 weight fly rod, which is like the equivalent of a broomstick. It doesn't bend, and it's hard to not want to do that because of the size of the fish. And then, sometimes we have these, forget what we call them, but they're like float lines of vegetation out there in the blue, where the blue water and it's a temperature change. And this vegetation runs along that current. And it's like, it draws bait fish, and then it draws large predators. And, when you're sitting on that floating line and you're casting to fish that you can see, and then all of a sudden the captain yells and there's a pod of Dorado, about to go underneath the boat. I was with a very good fly fisherman, and we were up at the front of the boat casting to this vegetation on the surface, and the captain yelled, Dorado, Dorado. And I knew how to roll cast. And I literally just lifted my line and row casted it to the other side of the boat. And I only got like 2 strips. And unfortunately for me, it wasn't one of the big males that hit my fly, of course. That would have been awesome. But it was a female, and it was like a marlin. I'd never, the way it would jump out, it didn't last as long as a marlin, but the way it jumped out of the water and man, I mean, that's hard to beat. That's really hard to beat. So I would say mountain streams is, if you said, Paul, you only have a year left to live, where would you, and you could live anywhere, where would you live to fish? I would say Colorado and a mountain stream. I would say Gunnison, because there's so many streams here that I mean, I can really choose. Once the dry season gets started, I could go anywhere and fish here. So did that answer your question?
It did perfectly. And my take from that is that it was relatively close, but the trout edged it. And so, yep, and, roll casting to Dorado and all of these wonderful species. Do you have a favorite saltwater species?
Redfish. I don't know. You haven't fished for redfish, you said, correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how I can explain a redfish. It's kind of like hooking a carp. I don't know if they are as long played as a carp, but because I've never caught a carp. I fish for carp lots, but for some reason I always get the carp that's nose down. The water is gin color. It's only 4 inches deep, and I'm down on my knees trying to make a cast 40 feet to a little. They always say it's a plate-sized target. And I just never seem to come out on top on that. But I will tell you about redfish. They can get real big, and they are like hooking onto a freight train. They don't do any acrobatics out of the water, but when you hook your line, it just leaves the water and spits everywhere. And you can in Texas you can sight fish them. With like little crabs or something that looks more like what they're feeding on, and it's the same thing almost as the carp. You're casting to a fish you can see. You have a very small window to get it there. You don't want to spook it with the fly line, and it's so rewarding when that fish turns on that fly. But the other thing about redfish, they're very similar to largemouth bass. Like, they are feeding crazy predators. And if you go down to Venice, Louisiana, which is on the very tip, of the Mississippi River, you're not fishing little. When I go down there, I fish like a 4-inch, 4-inch clouser, and bright green, and I'm, same thing. You could just be pulling through like a marsh, and you see them, and they're feeding, and you could do that roll cast out there and get it to them, and once you make a strip, if they see it, they will go. The only thing that's going to spook them is if they see your fly rod moving or your fly line moving. So if you can be a little smart about your presentation, but also the biggest redfish I ever caught was a 14-pounder. And we were going down the Mississippi River, and on one side there was riprap on either side, because the big tanker boats would come up that river, and they displace a ton of water, so they have riprap there to protect it. And the guide said, "Hey, you guys, just cast the riprap. Let's see what we can catch." And I had a 8-weight fly rod, and I had a floating line. Wait forward. I cast that sucker out towards the rocks, and I think I made 3 or 4 strips, and it just stopped. And I was blind casting like I would for a bass. I was just blind casting, and this big old redfish grabbed onto it, and I had a good battle with that fish. And it's the largest; it was a 14-pounder. And so there's different ways you can catch them depending on the environment. In Louisiana, it's a little bit more brackish water. So, but when you hook one, you've got to go fish for redfish. And I would say go to Venice, even though I spent most of my time in Texas. I'd say go to Venice, Louisiana. Great redfish there. And they have lots of fly fishing guides.
Yeah, so many places, so little time. That's the problem. They're one of those fish that have eluded me so far, but perhaps one day that's going to happen for me. But it's been wonderful. We're getting a sense of you as a person, as an angler, the sorts of things that you've done, how you view. I love your view on fishing as well, very, very much. I wanted to move on to the writing side of things, and you've touched on your journalism career. We're going to talk about The Promise very, very shortly. But I was interested to learn what changes during your career that you've seen through writing, and how that, be it technology or whatever else that has entered that has changed dramatically in your career in journalism and writing?
Let me see if I can tackle this. Keep bumping my mic. I apologize. Let's see if I can tackle it. Well, the way I became a journalist, I'm more, I have a master's degree in science, and I tend to be more interested in the science of fishery science and habitat and environment. And the way I became a writer, an outdoor writer, was on that interest. I saw some research that was done on a little lake in Texas on catch and release. It was catch and release right from the beginning, and they had a lot of fish sampling and research. So I did an article about the success of catch and release for largemouth bass, and it went to a conservation magazine in Texas. And the editor was a very good journalist. He wrote about shooting sports, but he was a great editor. And he thought I was another writer who was actually much better writer than me. I'll just say Steve. I'm not going to mention his name. His head will explode if I say his name. But he thought I was that guy because that guy was under contract to Bassmasters, and he thought the guy was faking, to be somebody else to get this story printed. And when he found out I was actually a person who had I have zero training in writing. And, I didn't take any of that in college. I took reading, I think, to get through that requirement. I hated writing in high school and college, and I loved science. So anyway, when he found that out, he asked me to join the staff of the magazine. God bless his soul. And he literally red inked everything I wrote. I mean, the paper turned, and he would return it to me. And it was such an ego buster that it only took me about maybe 6 months before I had no ego left. I mean, I just, I don't, and that's saying a lot when you consider I was a high school and college wrestler and a wrestling coach. And so ego is a big part of what I was used to, I grew up with. Anyway, so he worked with me. And so the reason why he liked me is he said my writing style was different. And so, I tried to be, as a writer, and I wrote for about 20 years, and I wrote for about 24 magazines. I learned, that editors, unlike writing today, in fly fishing today, and I think this is okay, we see guides mostly writing. People like Ed Engel are, don't see a lot of people like Ed Engel who's an outdoor writer, and and he's talented. But most you see guides writing, and there's a lot of good guides out there that really are really good writers. But it changed things because they're writing mostly about their own experiences, and it's more like, and that's okay because it really captures the romance of our sport. But when I was writing, that wasn't allowed. I was not allowed to write about myself. And I was okay with that because I didn't want to be an expert, because I didn't want people to expect things out of me that wasn't true. I mean, the first time I ever went fly fishing for trout, I was with Doc Thompson, the guide out in New Mexico. He was told to stick with me and try to help me. And we were fishing a very clear water river with Rio Grande cutthroat in it. And I was double casting to a river that was maybe 3 feet away from me and only about 20 feet wide. And bless his heart, he goes, "Hey," you're not casting to a rising fish 40 feet away. Why are you double hauling? Why are you double hauling? So I was double hauling, and he told me to chill, stop doing. So, that's one of the reasons why I didn't write about myself, because I knew I wasn't the king of fishermen. And so my early writing, I was writing about the angler, and they were the expert. The angler was always the expert. The guide was always the expert. And as I got older, that still continued, but I don't know. I started catching on to the romance part of fly fishing, and my book is definitely written in the romance type side. And you asked about my writing style. If you do get a chance to read the preface, not the preface, but if you get to read the front of the, oh God, I'm stuck on words right now because I'm talking so fast. Anyway, at the front of the book, Ted Williams from the East Coast of the United States, great conservationist, really well-known fly fisherman in America. He read portions of the book and talked about it for me, introduced the book for me at the front of the book. And he mentioned that my writing style was different than most writers in that I write very, in fact, river runs through it. Remember his father kept telling him, shorter, shorter, not so long, shorter. That Scottish style of writing that they were trying. Well, that is very much how I write. I don't sit there and, paint a rainbow to tell you how wonderful it was that fish jumped. Okay. I keep it very simple, but I still get the message across. So he said something like that, was something like do nothing right. I don't know, but he compared me to another outdoor writer. And the thing is that my writing style is a little bit different. And that is for a reason. I used to consume outdoor literature, but once I heard an editor tell me that my writing style was unique and to be very careful not to mimic other writers, I stopped reading other outdoor writers. And I read instead history books and stuff. I read books about history, but I do not read outdoor writers right now because I want to keep my style and my voice. I want to keep my voice. I don't want it to be like other people's voices. There are a lot of people copying John Garrock. You know what I mean? I love John Garrock. But there's a lot of people trying to be John Garrock. I'm not trying to be John Garrock. I'm just going to keep writing my style. So.
I like that very much. And I know when I spoke to Steve Duda, he said something similar. And I know I'm bar articles when they're sent to me. I don't read fishing stuff. I don't really listen to a great deal of fishing podcasts. I try and look, like yourself, away from fishing for inspiration for whatever that may be. And I find that keeps the head a little bit clearer. And I was wondering if your style, because you had, as you say, no formal training, that allowed you to develop that style. And I often think of sport as an example where people are coached, and we're seeing that change now. And yourself as a former wrestling coach as well, that people will coach or teach in a particular style because that's the way that it's done. Whereas now that we're seeing in sport that people using that phrase, express yourself, or allowing them not to hold let's say a baseball bat, because I'm talking to yourself, slightly differently, or the stance is slightly differently, if it works, because those things can be coached out of you, can't they?
Yes, they can. And it took me a while because I was, as a coach, I was very much, I had a system, and I wanted my wrestlers to wrestle according to the system because it's easier to perfect. Wrestling is a sport that requires perfection of technique. If you've got any little mistakes, or your opponent will take advantage of them. So when you teach a system, it's easier to go back and correct it with the boys, and it's easier for them to wrestle. I didn't want my wrestlers to think while they were on the mat. I wanted them to react. So the system mattered. But I do think you hit it on. I think you hit it on the nail. I think that the fact that I'm not formally trained made a difference in my writing style. And I don't know that my writing style is for anybody else. I don't know if it's great, but I just know it is what it is. Ted Williams recognized it. Some of my former editors recognized it. I listened to them, and I stuck to my voice, keeping my voice pure, unchanged. And I think as a podcaster, I think you have you told me not to talk about you, but I think you have a very unique style and a unique voice. And, I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. Keep that voice, that's who you are. And it makes your podcast very interesting to listen to.
Thank you. Well,
Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. That's very, very kind. And that's advice for people. And we have broken a lot of people who have not written something before. And it is the advice they say is use fewer words as you possibly can. You don't need to do that. And write it as you would write it, not how you think I would want you to write it. And then we can help you with that process. I'm like you. I've not had formal training, although I've been around writing for quite some time now, so I can pick stuff, I think, to the best of my ability, but it allows me to see things in a much easier way, I think, and it works for me that way. So I'm all for that. And yeah, find your voice and sing is the best advice that I can give. So we're going to move on to your book, The Promise.
Okay.
And was that an easy process for you? Did you have a strict regime with your writing? Did it flow freely for you? How did you go about that?
Well, I had co-written some books and a series of books too with other outdoor writers. And I think my last count was like nearing 1,000 feature articles over my. So I mean, I had done a lot of writing, but I had not written anything like The Promise. And when I was on the road for I think it was American Cowboy Magazine, my father passed away. He God, let's see if I can talk about this without crying. My father and I had a very rough relationship because, to be honest with you, as a kid, I was a jerk. I was a real jerk. I've been arrested a few times, and I just caused my dad so much trouble. And but then in my early 20s, my dad and I reconciled, and we had a great love for each other. And it broke my heart that I didn't get to see him again or get to talk to him again. He passed away while I was out on the road in Arizona doing photography for this article I was doing. It was a big major feature. And anyway, so I was very emotional about that. Well, The Promise came about. My wife wanted me to write this for my children. But it came about my 50-year-old need to go back, not my 50-year-old, my 50-year-long need to go back to Colorado. And I was a military brat. My dad served in the military for 27 years for a Strategic Air Command. And so I never lived in a place for more than 2 years. We traveled. We picked up our roots. And so when I got to Colorado for the first time in my life, I was there 5 years. For the first time in my life, I was going to school with friends that I went to school with for 2 or 3 years. So it was the first time I ever felt like I had a home. It was the first time. So, excuse me. So living in Colorado meant a lot to me, besides the fact that I ran amok. You know, we went up in the mountains. We fished streams. We fished ponds. We did whatever we wanted because we were all military brats, and our dads were in Vietnam. My dad was fighting in Vietnam, and I was, running crazy. And my poor mom, she couldn't keep track of me. So I was very attached to Colorado. And then my grandma was getting very, very ill, and the brothers. My dad's from a large family of military men. And the brothers told my dad, my dad retired from the Strategic Air Command, and they offered him a civilian job. But my brothers told him, we need you to come back to California to take care of mom, because they were sharing her. Every 3 months, they would move her to a new, another family to take. They were sharing her care. So we picked up and left. And while we were leaving, I think we were around Fort Carson, or we were getting close to Pueblo. I looked back and I saw Cheyenne Mountain and Pikes Peak. And I was very angry. I was in the back of the station wagon. I didn't want to have anything to do with my dad. And I told my dad, I probably yelled at him. I was a freshman in high school. I told him, I hate you, and I am coming back here. You need to know I'm coming back to Colorado. I told you I was a brat. And so for 50 years, I've been holding on to this. I've got to get back to Colorado. That's my home. Colorado's my home. And my first wife we had a chance to move from Philadelphia to anywhere we wanted in the U.S. My company was going to move me. I said, we can go back to California, where both you and I are from, in the San Francisco Bay Area, or we can go back to Texas. And I said that kind of low voice because I hated Texas, not the people. I just hated the heat. And then I said, or we can go to Colorado, which is beautiful. You want to go to Colorado, don't you? She chose Texas of all places. I was like, you got to be kidding me. So, so that was still sitting on my shoulders. I needed to get back to Colorado. Well, then then we divorced. I met my wife, Anna, and my wife needed a change of, she was born and raised in Mexico and became a naturalized citizen and lived in Laredo, Texas, which is desert. And so the idea, so I took her up on a vacation to go to Colorado. She loved Colorado. So we moved to Colorado. So the book is about, I'm trying to speed myself along. So the book is about the promise I made to my father and how I carried that promise on my heart. And I mean, it was there. I mean, it was like constantly saying, so when are you going to do this? 50 years later, I arrived in Colorado, in Montrose, Colorado, on the western slope. And I then, as soon as I landed there, my wife said, as soon as we arrived, my wife said, okay, you're in Colorado. When are you going to go fishing? And I was like, I don't know. Do they have bass here? What am I going to do? So I had friends, Mark Williams, who's a fly fishing author. I bugged Mark for answers. I bugged Marcos Enriquez in Houston, Texas. He's a great saltwater fisherman. I bugged them because they knew trout fishing and they kind of helped me out. And then I met Nick, the fly tying guru, and people kind of helped me out, figure out what to do. And then just like writing, I self-taught myself how to fish for trout, which is quite hilarious because, it takes longer if you would just get a mentor, it'd be much easier. But getting back to the book. So writing the book was very hard for me because I kept reflecting back on my father. And now I was writing the book in Colorado. So I'm in Colorado, and every time I hit a stream in Colorado, I'm wet wading it. My heart is jumping. I can't tell you. The wind blowing through the aspens, the song of the stream as it's going down, and the smell that you get in the morning when you get on a stream in the morning. All those things are hitting me. My heart's jumping. It was like I just ran a 2-miler. My heart's jumping out, and I'm so emotional over all this. And then I'd go home and write the book, work on the book. And then about 2/3 of the way through the book, my mom died. So now I'm having to deal with my mom's death. And, I heard somebody once say, why do fly fishing books always have to be so sappy? Why are we always, fly fishing's a sport. Why are we always writing about the romance? It's always about someone's dad dying or something. I can't help it. That's what my book, it happened during the writing and it affected the way I wrote. Because not all the stories in the book are about fly fishing. Some of them are about experiences I've had, like going up on a game trail head face to face with a bull moose, or stuff like that. Or my wife said, when I told her you wanted me to read something from the book, she goes, write about the horse, in that big old scar you got on your butt from riding that horse for 5 days. We were up in the Black Hills and I was riding a horse that was way too big for me. And I came back with a missing skin on my rump. That's in the book. That's called the Navajo. That story's called the Navajo. So there's different things in the book, but they all kind of come. So the book is more of a look at my life as a journalist. The steps of how I came from being, from a non-outdoor family. My dad, no outdoors in my family. And how, a friend of mine in Colorado taught me how to fish. And I caught my first bullhead catfish. And then I didn't pick up a rod again for 10 years. And my brother and I kind of discovered fishing together in our 20s. But between that time, I did a lot of hiking and backpacking in the mountains of California. So that's kind of probably more than you wanted. But it was hard writing the book. It was very hard.
And it's interesting, those difficult things that you had to go through. And I often ask creative people on here that when things are difficult, do you find that you are more creative as a result of it?
Yes, yes, definitely. Um, and having been a wrestler all my life, or coaching wrestlers all my life, and I also competed in judo. You're faced with I wasn't the best, so you're faced with lots of setbacks and lots of losses, and you got to pick yourself back up. And when it comes to writing, and you get those setbacks, I think you kind of go deeper. You kind of get in touch with yourself a little deeper than you would, especially as an outdoor journalist. I was kind of more shallow because I was writing about other people. And then all of a sudden, I'm reaching in and I'm having to deal with my feelings. My wife says, I've got a good heart, but I'm a mean SOB. My mom used to call me El Diablo, the devil, because I did so many bad things as a kid. Here's a story I got to tell you. I know we're probably a little. I got to tell you the story though, because my brother, I want him to hear it again. When I was living on Guam, I was a young boy. I was like in third grade. We had these hibiscus bushes, these flowering bushes, and they had like yellowjack, big, wasp and stuff in them. And we were out in my front yard, and we were on base housing, so all our yards were 1 yard. We're out on my front yard, and we're playing football. And my little brother wanted to play. And I said, no, he's too small. No, this is my middle brother, Richard. So we threw the football, and it took a wrong bounce, and it went back behind the hibiscus bush. So one of the kids had a football helmet. So we put the football helmet on my brother, Richard. And you could literally spin that football helmet around, and it freely spun around his head because his head was so little compared to that football helmet. And we sent him into the bushes. We told him, don't worry about the yellow jackets. They can't sting you. You're okay. You got a helmet on. They got up underneath the helmet, and they beat the crud out of that kid. He came out of there screaming really loud. And my dad used to have to beat me. I mean, he had it back then. People beat their kids to get them to straighten up. My dad just beat the crud out of me. We had to run him to the base emergency dispensary because his face was all deformed. And it was because I put the football helmet. And it didn't end there. It just kept going on and on and on. I mean, I kept harassing that kid all the way till he got about the size where he could beat me up, because I'm the shortest of the three wrestlers. But yeah, so I mean, yeah. So I guess I forgot your question already. I'm sorry. I am enjoying myself.
You're doing just fine. And there was you just told us that story, which was cool. I think anyone who's got brothers, older, younger, has either been through that sort of thing themselves. So I don't know that that's a particularly, well, actually sending them into a nest like that probably was. But I think that's part of, certainly when I grew up as well, it was a similar sort of thing. You fought with your brother, you did whatever you did as part of that growing up process. And I think you balanced it out with karma and everything else that you have mentioned as well. But I wondered, we've talked about the book, we've learned a little bit about it. Do you want to read us a section?
Sure. I would love to. I'd love to read a section to you. I better tell just a little bit about this chapter because I had the opportunity to fly fish about 60 miles off the delta of the Mississippi River. We were way out there on the Gulf, and what we were doing, we were fishing under a tension leg platform. And it's a platform with interwoven steel cables that are anchored to the ocean floor. And so it's like a bobber. The platform, as huge as it is, sits on the surface, but it's held down by cables. And they have big booms where they burn off the natural gas as they're pulling the gas out of the ocean's floor. And these booms light up the entire surrounding ocean. It's just incredible. And I had an opportunity to go out there and fish at night for yellowfin tuna. And so that's what this is about. Our captain was named Peace Marvel, and he was like a cartoon character. That's all I can say about him. He's just, Peace Marvel. how do you get a name like Peace Marvel? I mean, he's just an incredible man. Great, great, great fisherman. But I'll start reading. I'll do my best. I'm a writer. But I'll go ahead and start right now if you want me to.
Yeah.
Okay. I was the first to hook up. A sizable tuna intercepted my fly as it swung up towards the surface. My next strip didn't move any line, and I instinctively swept my heavy rod back in a classic hook set motion. The take felt like I had lassoed a passing torpedo. The discarded fly line flew off the deck in a few blinks of the eye, and within seconds the tuna was into my first 100 yards of backing. While flashing a devilish smile, Captain Peace Marvel asked, "How are you doing over there?" "Damn," I cried. "This fish is going to spoil me. Am I doing okay?" Peace jokingly queried back, "You tell me. Are you doing okay?" He was a great guy. 20 minutes into the battle, the big fish suddenly came off. Reaching for an answer, I checked my hook for sharpness. Careful inspection of the streamer revealed a sharp hook. Not one to linger over mistakes or bad fortune, I barked out, "Damn, that hurt!" In the end, neither Artie, my partner, nor I would succeed in boating a single yellowfin tuna. However, several black fins were landed and thrown into the boat's cooler, including a healthy 15-pound fish my partners splendidly fought. Later, Captain Marvel would create an on-boat meal for 3 from Cosby's larger fish. Inevitably, the action slowed to a crawl, and we moved over to the nearby mooring buoy used by the large cruise ships that regularly service the platforms. Captain Marvel grilled fresh tuna steaks and served the late-night meal with a tangy potato salad and a much-appreciated wine. After cleaning up, we retired to the oversized bean bags lying on the same deck we fished from just hours before. Beyond the reach of city lights, darkness reveals what our technology has hidden from us. In the quiet of the passing night, one couldn't help but look to the billions of celestial bodies spread out across the cloudless sky and consider the mysteries surrounding the ocean, giant tuna, and fly fishing. All questions about where we came from and where we are going no longer mattered. The sense of belonging to something greater overtook me, and the sky quieted my soul. Before long, my angling partners and I laid our failed quest aside and fell asleep well within the reach of Ursa's embrace. There you go.
Nice. Very, very nice. I enjoyed that immensely. And that's given us a look into the promise. So, folks, if you've enjoyed listening to Paul, if you've enjoyed that reading as well, go check it out, because I think, you know, your vivaciousness, your lust for life is coming across just wonderfully, and in your writing as well. And it's just wonderful to hear somebody who takes pleasure, joy in so many things. Is really wonderful to listen to. So I've enjoyed that immensely. Are you tempted? You said the word retired. Does that mean that writing for you has ceased now, or do you do it as a hobby more than anything else?
I do not write, and I don't write fishing articles for magazines anymore unless I'm doing something for someone for $5. You know, I out of my heart, I like to do stuff for people to help them along. But I don't write as a freelance writer anymore, because there are freelance writers out there. Their careers need to get going. They don't need to be competing against me. I've already done it, and I have some of them, like my buddy Chip. He's a great freelance writer, and it's their world now. So, but that said, I am working on books. I've got a bass field guide, fly fishing for bass, that I'm working on right now. And then after that, I've been working on actually a horror story. When I was a journalist, I actually did an assignment where I went out with this Ghostbuster group. They were engineers, they were NASA engineers, but they had a love for that kind of stuff. And I actually experienced a couple of those. And so I'm working on a horror book based on the true story. And so I've got those two books right now that I keep balancing. When I get tired of writing about bass, I go over to the horror book, and then when I scare the dickens out of myself with the horror book, I go back over to the bass. So I am going to continue writing books. I don't know how many fly fishing books are left in me, but I'm sure I'll come up with some reason to write a fly fishing book. But I'm doing it at my own pace. John Garrock, that bless his heart, he writes in the winter. The book is done. He fishes during the fishing season. Then when winter comes back around, he works on a new book. I mean, I don't know if if I can be that productive. I mean, I am retired. I maybe would like to go every 2 years a book, if that's okay.
Perfect. Well, I look forward to seeing that more, and being a horror fan as well, I'll keep an eye out for that. We've spoken now, Paul, for over an hour, and I just wanted to give you the toughest question that we have, the Fly Culture Road Trip playlist. Are you going to give me a song that sets the tone for a day's fishing? It doesn't sound as though you get many songs to listen to because you're 3 and 4 minutes away from the stream, so I guess you don't get much of a chance to listen to. But if there were a song for our listeners to tune into, what would it be?
Well, this is going to sound real corny because I'm here in Colorado and because I'm old. I have a favorite song by John Denver that I listen to whenever I hit the road. I just slap that in, and sometimes I'll hit repeat button 3 or 4 times. It's called "I'd Rather Be a Cowboy," and that song, I don't know, just, about being up in the mountains and saying goodbye to your love as she goes to live down in the city, but you're not going to leave the mountains. That's kind of one of my favorite songs to throw in when I hit the road.
That's a wonderful choice. And being a big John Denver fan myself, we already have Rocky Mountain High, which I know, do they still play it at Denver Airport as you land? And I love that song. That sums it up perfectly. So that's a wonderful choice for the playlist, so I will add that one. Paul, if people want to get a copy of the book, if they want to connect with you, how do they find you?
Okay, right now the book's available on Amazon. I thought I had opened the market to the United Kingdom. I think it's ridiculous that Amazon makes you open every market. It should be they sell it, right? And then you can get it no matter where you live. But they can get it on Amazon. It is a self-published book, unlike my other stuff. But they can get it there. But to reach me, best way to reach me, believe it or not, is Facebook. I have quite a few fly fishing connections on Facebook, and you can look for me at Paul Cañada. Let me get that. I don't know what the. Can I send you a link?
Yeah, it'll be on there, so people will find that anyway. So
that's the easiest way to reach me
out that way. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
perfect. Yeah,
and I do look often. So
perfect.
Okay,
perfect. Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. It's been fantastic. Your energy is flowing across the mic and across the Atlantic to me, and it's wonderful. And I know listeners are going to enjoy listening to yourself and your stories and a little bit about the book. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Pete, it's my pleasure. And I'm very lucky to be able to part of your great podcast.
Thank you so much, everyone. This has been the Fly Culture Podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As ever, there'll be plenty more coming down the line. These are all free. There's no cost. There's no adverts. There's nothing. We just love talking about fishing and also writing as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as me. And thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture Podcast.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.